Welcome back to the deep dive. Today we are conducting a special mission, a really concentrated knowledge extraction. We're focusing entirely on the high precision world of welding inspection standards. So if you are preparing for your CSWIP 3.1 exam or you just need to sharpen up, this is for you.
That's right. Our goal today isn't just about finding the right multiple choice answers. It's about unpacking the core engineering principles behind them.
Right.
We're going to drill down into 4 key areas: material science, regulatory standards, site supervision, and inherent material defects.
So this is all about getting to the why behind the best practices and getting there fast. We're turning specs into insights.
Right, so you can anticipate failures.
Exactly. Okay, let's get into it, starting with probably the biggest chemical threat to a finished weld, hydrogen.
Let's do it.
So we're going to start with a critical material choice. This is something an inspector deals with all the time when high-strength steel is involved. Here's our first question. Question 23. When hydrogen control is specified for a manual metal arc welding project, the electrode would normally be A, cellulosic, B, iron oxide, C, acid, or D, basic. And the correct answer, which is absolutely fundamental to preventing fractures, is D, basic.
When a specification calls for hydrogen control, it's because the cost of failure is just astronomical. This whole decision is driven by one threat: delayed hydrogen cracking, DHC.
We hear about DHC all the time, but why is it so insidious for an inspector?
Because it doesn't happen when you're watching. That's the key. Hydrogen, which mostly comes from moisture in the electrode coating, gets absorbed into the molten weld.
Okay.
But then as the weld cools down, those hydrogen atoms get trapped. They get stuck in the microstructure, especially where there's high stress. So the cracking can show up hours or even days later.
So an inspector can sign off on a weld that looks completely perfect, and then hours later, catastrophic failure could be starting from the inside out.
That's it, exactly. And high-strength steels, the kind you see in pressure vessels or offshore structures, they're just much less tolerant to this trapped hydrogen. If you have hydrogen and you have stress, the steel's internal bonds just get weakened and start to pull apart.
I know that cellulosic electrodes, option A, they're often faster, great for deep penetration, but they're also notorious for generating a ton of hydrogen.
A huge amount.
So what makes basic electrodes the guaranteed solution here?
It's all about their composition and how they're made. Basic electrodes use flux with compounds like calcium carbonate.
Yeah.
They're designed specifically for low moisture absorption.
And they're baked, right?
Rigorously. They're baked at high temperatures and have to be kept in heated ovens on site. Their whole purpose is to deposit weld metal with the absolute minimum possible diffusible hydrogen. That's how you lower the risk of DHC.
It's simple then. Minimize the source of the problem.
That is the first and most fundamental line of defense.
Okay, so once we've established we need that low hydrogen capability, we hit the reality of a busy construction site. How do you, as the inspector, know for sure that the correct electrode is being used?
The million-dollar question.
Which brings us right to our second knowledge point. This is all about enforcement.
Yep.
Question 24. You would, with certainty, recognize a hydrogen-controlled flux-covered electrode from its A, color, B, length, C, trade name, or D, AWSBS 639 code letter. The only verifiable guarantee here, that absolute certainty, is D, the AWSBS 639 code letter.
And this is where so many real-world mistakes happen. Relying on something visual like its color or a brand name that a welder likes to use. Why is that such a critical failure for an inspector?
Because they're just not reliable. They can be deceptive. You might think you know the color, but that can change between manufacturers or even different batches from the same company.
And the trade name.
The trade name just tells you the brand. It doesn't legally certify that it meets the performance specs in the procedure.
Right. And what's so important here is that the official standardized code letter from AWS, or British Standard, that's the only legally and functionally verifiable method. It's a language. It spells out the mechanical properties, the position, and critically, the maximum diffusible hydrogen content.
So on site, what does the inspector actually have to do? What's the practical step?
You have to physically compare the code stamped on the packaging or even on the electrode itself against the designation that's listed in the WPS, the Welding Procedure Specification.
And you're looking for a specific suffix, usually.
Usually, yeah. You'll look for something like H4 or H8. And that number, that tells you the maximum diffusible hydrogen in milliliters per 100 grams of deposited metal.
So if the procedure demands H4 and you see a package marked E7018H8, that's a non-conformance. Doesn't matter what the brand is.
It's an immediate stop work situation. The higher number means more hydrogen. And the best inspectors, they go a step further. They'll ask for the manufacturer's certificate of conformance for that specific batch to prove it's been tested. The code is the language of quality. Everything else is just, well, it's just noise.
Okay, that transition from certification brings us neatly to the human element. Once we know the materials are correct, the next challenge is verifying that the people doing the work are operating under the right level of supervision.
Right, the boots on the ground.
Question 25. When manual metal arc welding is being carried out on an open construction site, which groups of welders are most likely to require continuous monitoring? A, concrete shuttering welding team, B, pipe welders, C, plater welders, or D, plant maintenance welders?
Great question.
The group most likely to require that constant supervision is B, pipe welders.
And if we look at the bigger picture, this is all about risk management. Continuous monitoring isn't about distrusting the welder. It's about putting your inspection resources when the risk is highest.
And pipe welders tick every box.
They tick every single box.
So let's break down those factors. First, you have the positional complexity. What makes pipe welding so much harder?
Well, it's not like welding on a flat bench. A pipe weld often means you're doing vertical up, overhead, maybe in a really restricted space. We call it a 6G position.
So you're fighting gravity.
You're fighting gravity. You're trying to control the slag, the molten pool, keep a steady hand, all while upside down. The chance for defects, slag inclusion, lack of fusion, it just goes up exponentially.
A flat plate weld is like a lab experiment compared to that.
Exactly. Which leads to the second factor, criticality. If a weld on a simple structural beam has a flaw, you might have to do a local repair.
Okay.
But if a high-pressure pipe carrying steam or, hazardous chemicals fails, the consequences are catastrophic. We're talking environmental disaster, serious injury, or a plant shutdown that costs millions a day.
The potential cost of failure directly dictates the inspector's level of focus.
It has to. And the third factor is just procedure adherence. Because pipe welds are so critical, the WPS is often incredibly detailed. It specifies preheat temperatures, maybe windshields. I once saw an entire section of pipe get rejected because an inspector noticed the windscreen blew down for a minute and the root pass temperature dropped below the minimum before the next pass went in.
Wow.
Continuous monitoring is what catches that. It ensures every single line of that complex procedure is followed, every time.
So for pipe welders, it's managing 3 risks at once. Technical difficulty, catastrophic consequence, and procedural complexity.
That's a perfect summary.
Okay, so let's pivot now from process control back to material integrity. What happens when the defect is already deep inside the base metal itself?
Right, a pre-existing condition.
We're moving from external factors to internal weaknesses. Question 22. What effect do mid-thickness laminations in steel plate normally have when they are located within a weld, HAZ? A, cause lamellar tearing, B, fuse together to form a bond, C, affect the weld metal composition, or D, cause internal tearing on a microscale. And the specific severe failure this causes is a cause lamellar tearing.
This is a concept you really have to visualize. We're talking about how a defect that's already in the plate becomes a point of failure, but only when you add the stresses from welding.
So let's define the lamination first. What is it exactly?
A mid-thickness lamination is basically a flat planar defect. Think of it like a thin pancake or a layer inside the steel plate running parallel to the surface. It's usually from impurities or voids in the original steel ingot that didn't fully weld together when the plate was being rolled.
And crucially, that defect creates a weakness in one very specific direction.
Absolutely. The rolling process makes steel strong along its length and width, the X and Y axis, but it's incredibly weak in the through thickness direction, what we call the Z axis.
Okay.
And if a lamination is there, the material strength in that Z axis is practically zero. You're trying to hold it together across a plane that isn't even fused.
Now add welding. We know as the molten metal cools and solidifies, it shrinks. What does that shrinkage stress do?
It creates these massive, relentless pulling forces, tensile stresses that pull the base metal inward, perpendicular to the weld. And that pull is happening directly in the material's weakest direction, the Z-axis, right under the weld.
So you've got this unstoppable vice grip, the shrinkage, stress pulling apart a fragile, layered piece of metal, the lamination in the most sensitive area, the heat-affected zone.
And lamellar tearing is the inevitable result. The weak plane of that lamination just rips open under the shrinkage stress. It's a severe, through-thickness crack that you'll often see running parallel to the fusion boundary.
Wow.
It really shows why quality control has to start with the base material itself, not just the weld. If that plate has laminations, the structure is compromised before a welder even strikes an arc.
The other options just don't capture the mechanical violence of it. It's not fusing, it's tearing. The issue is force meeting a fundamental weakness.
Precisely. And understanding this is key to knowing when to use specific joint designs that can help minimize that destructive Z-axis stress.
That was a tremendous deep dive. 4 absolutely essential concepts, moving from material chemistry to site logistics and back to material physics. Let's just quickly recap those 4 points we confirmed today.
Sounds good. First, we learned that for critical hydrogen control, you must specify and use basic electrodes. They're made for low moisture to prevent delayed cracking.
And we confirm that on-site, you verify this with the official AWSBS 639 code letter. That's the legal standard. Not color, not trade names.
Third, on an open construction site, pike welders get top priority for continuous monitoring. It's because of the combination of complexity, consequence, and procedure.
And finally, we detailed how those pre-existing defects, mid-thickness laminations, will lead directly to lamellar tearing when they're hit with welding shrinkage stress in the HAZ.
We've really moved beyond just memorizing answers here. There's deeper understanding of the science and the risk assessment. It helps you anticipate and prevent failures in the real world.
And that brings us to our final provocative thought for you to consider. We spent a lot of time establishing the need for low hydrogen basic electrodes to prevent cracking.
Right. But welding doesn't happen in a vacuum.
Exactly. It happens on open sites with changing conditions. The electrode only controls the hydrogen coming from the consumable.
Good point.
If the atmospheric conditions on that site prevent proper preheating, which is often required, even using the correct low hydrogen electrode might not be enough to stop delayed hydrogen cracking. The steel cools too fast, trapping whatever hydrogen is there.
So the electrode is only one part of the equation.
So think about this. Beyond just the electrode specification, what other crucial atmospheric and procedural controls must an inspector absolutely verify and confirm regarding the environment itself before ever letting a welder strike an arc on a critical component? You have the tools now. The next step is managing the total environment of the weld every single time.
Great thought to end on.
Good luck with your preparation, and we'll see you on the next deep dive.